To have stalled. Ukrainian and Russian delegates last held face-to-face talks in Istanbul in March. They've since held meetings by video link, but Ukraine's president says they've made little progress.
Such negotiations are currently at zero. Everyone really wants to push us little by little towards some result that is definitely undesirable for us, because we have not yet been asked, but beneficial for other parties that have their own interests. Fatigue is growing. People want some kind of result for themselves, and we need a result.
Now the requirements for security guarantees is one thing, and the settlements of relations with Crimea, Sevastopol and the Donbass are to be taken outside of those agreements. So we are back in a dead-end situation.
While negotiations between Moscow and Kyiv began 4 days after Russia invaded, low-level delegations from both sides first met on Ukraine's border with Belarus. They came together again in March for a second and third round where they agreed to form some humanitarian corridors. The first high-level contact took place in Turkey during intense fighting and bombardment in the Ukrainian port city of Mariupol. 2 hours of talks achieved no breakthroughs. Russia continued bombing. On April the 7th, both sides announced talks were entering a new phase, but despite many rounds since, no solid ceasefire has been agreed.
The analysis is that this will grind on for quite a long time. The key question now is, will Europe be able to remain unified? Because we see increasing inflation, high energy prices, and energy and food are deeply connected. So when you have high energy prices, you will also have high food prices, in addition to the blockade of food leaving Ukraine that's being stopped. So we're seeing a huge issue. Maybe Russia thinks that they can play this for what it's worth and see Europe divided.
Right.
Nevertheless, we saw France, Italy, and Germany go to Kiev by train, and they have announced that Ukraine will be a candidate country for EU membership. Now, how long that will take remains to be seen, but that's kind of a vote of confidence and support for Ukraine.
Indeed, NATO Secretary General Teresa has said that
Europe, he has now decided to recklessly put that on the line in order, by turning off the tap to many countries in Europe, they are never going to go back to such high dependency on Russian energy. And other countries like China will not pick up the slack. They might pick up a little bit of it, but allow Russia to do the same thing to them that they're doing to Europe. So I think that Putin has really put himself in a corner, and it's in my
old Minsk agreements brokered by Germany and France in 2014, 2015. And we've seen that basically Russia did how it basically used those agreements. Those agreements basically provided some form of settlement, in the way that Ukraine would give some self-governance provisions for those lands occupied by Russia at that time in the east of Ukraine, and while Russia will withdrew its forces from there. But Russia never withdrew its forces from there. Actually, they used all the opportunity to de facto occupy, de facto annex those territories. And now they use those territories to further attack Ukraine, and actually to also use even manpower mobilized from those territories.
Small Donbas republics that Russia has already recognized, and then maybe there could be some kind of negotiations about other territories in Zaporozhye Oblast and Kherson Oblast that Russia has since occupied, that maybe also could go somewhere, but maybe that's negotiable. I don't know. But it's understood also that Ukraine government right now is not ready to take those conditions. So that Russia right now, the Russian strategy is to grind the Ukrainian military, grind their morale. It's the pitched battle in the Donbass right now. It's very similar to the storming and siege of Verdun by the Germans in 1916, when they didn't have enough forces to have an all-out offensive on the Western Front. They concentrated on one fortress, the Verdun, using their firepower superiority to kill as much French as possible and break the morale of the French army. And right now, Russia is trying to do more or less the same, of course, on a very different level of usage of power and men. But apparently, Ukrainians are suffering their military heavy casualties. That could affect morale. And if Ukrainian morale begins to snap, then most likely Ukraine would be ready to take the Russian conditions.
Okay, Teresa, right now we are at a point where neither side
crisis. And I think that's a worrying message right there. And the back channel reportedly is Dr. Henry Kissinger, who is actually 99 years old. So he had counseled that Ukraine give up some territory. So I think that that didn't fly very well.
Right.
And I think that over the longer term, many analysts in Washington, D.C. are concerned that the U.S. is taking the eye off the ball in regard to China. They're worried about getting bogged down in a very, very long, drawn-out affair here in Ukraine. Alternatively, some see it as a way to weaken Russia over the longer term.
Right.
So there are very different viewpoints on this.
Indeed.
And Russia is becoming more and more isolated, and their economy is really going to suffer.
Teresa, some experts have suggested that we could end up with a
that's a question how it can be enforced. If it is enforced by international peacekeeping forces, whether there is any international peacekeeping force ready to come to enforce such a ceasefire. So it's a very complicated issue, I think.
Yeah.
So probably it might be one of the scenarios,
right.
But just
Pavel,
so far,
your
just
thoughts. I mean, your thoughts. There are various scenarios out there about how this
at least become more positions will be more stable, and it's clear that the Ukrainians hope that in August, September they could turn the tables and have a strategic initiative and maybe go against the Russians in an offensive. The Russians believe that they have the capability to grind down the Ukrainians. So that will be decided actually on the battlefield, who has the initiative, who has the upper hand, and then that will be translated somehow into a negotiating